Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Lisa Ralph, leading marketing over here at Vcinity. I'll be your MC and question master this afternoon. We're here to talk about enterprise AI. We know that AI is at the top of mind for most of us these days. You might be at a stage where you're experimenting with AI. You might have thought about, where should I even apply AI? You might actually have a few models in deployment as well. But probably most, if not all of us, have thought about, okay, this is great, but I do work for a company, most likely. How does this actually scale up? We know that feeding a single AI beast is one thing, but the very thought of scaling AI alongside all of the wonderful complexities that come with the enterprise is a very tall order. So today we are here to spearhead that conversation on how you can actually win that battle, what you can do, how to navigate this journey. So let's get started. I'm very excited to introduce you to our trifecta of speakers who are going to guide you on your quest. So guys, if you don't mind hopping on camera, you're already there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is my immense pleasure to introduce you all to Steve Wallo, Chief Technology Officer at Vcinity. Hey, Steve.
Hey.
Thanks for joining. And Rob Parish, Senior Director of Data and AI Solutions at Dell. Thanks for joining us, Rob. Say hey. And Pat, rounding out our trifecta, Pat Regin is Director of Native Edge over at Dell Technologies as well. So Steve, Rob, Pat, we're so excited to have you here. And with that, let's not waste any more time. Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Can you hear me okay, Lisa? I had a little technical problem on my end.
All good.
All right, fantastic. So today what we're going to do, we're talk specifically about AI for the enterprise, right? We've seen it evolve over the last couple of years, everything from ChatGPT to different ways that people are using it in the military, commercial space. But today it's all going to be about how do I apply this to my domain, my specific use cases in my business here. The slide in front of you, this is kind of interesting. So this is the hype cycle. See Gartner do this all the time. What's kind of cool is, one, aside from just the labeling, the peak of inflated expectations, somebody gets a coin for that one here. But if you look at the edge AI, you look at foundational models, you look at some of the things that people are trying to do in the enterprise, in your business or in your mission, it revolves usually around those types of things, right? And what we're seeing here on this curve, it's pretty indicative, which is I have all this promise for what I'm going to be able to do. It's going to be fantastic. And then you start to deploy, you start to work with it, and you get into this trough of delusionment, right? It's, okay, now this is problematic. I'm running into all these challenges. How do we get around some of these things? What are some advice that we have through industry leaders like Dell to say, okay, here's what we're going to do to solve some of these things, right? And the idea is to get from that trough of disillusionment into the slope of enlightenment as fast as you can. That's what we're going to talk about today. One thing to note is that this hype cycle, once it becomes domain specific, meaning how am I using this for my specific business or mission, right? We're going to see a little bit of a change through this chart. So we'll wait to see what Gartner comes out with next year. But this gives you a little bit of an example of kind of where we are and where we're getting ready to go and some of the challenges associated with it. So if you go to the next slide there, if you look at the history of this, right, which is, in the past, some of the model training, it wasn't very specific to the enterprise. It was more, I'm going to mine the internet for different things. It was smaller data sets, not really a lot of information there. They were all local, meaning I pushed it to one big compute platform. The data might have been mined from different locations, but I'm processing it in one central piece where time and latency and, getting that done really wasn't that much of an issue. If you look at what happens today, right, all of a sudden now we have larger data sets. You're getting that data from across your enterprise, right? I want to be able to pull all that information in where latency becomes a problem because, my data is distributed everywhere. And oh, by the way, speed is starting to become very important. If I'm doing drug research, I'm doing tactical mission things, all of a sudden now speed and importance of getting this model trained is becoming paramount. And then if you take a look at, well, what are we doing tomorrow, right? All of a sudden, we're going to get away from just training specific pieces into inferencing, meaning I've done something, I'm pushing it out, I want to go ahead and use it, but I also want to make sure that I'm monitoring that so that I can make tuning adjustments. I can do fine-grained tuning so that if I'm looking for something, I'm not, if I'm looking for a tank, I didn't get a picture of a horse, right? Something like that, right? The other piece is I want to be able to look at things outside of my domain, right? So we're going to talk about how do I get information across my enterprise. But what if that also involves bringing information outside of my enterprise to complement that, right? How do we get so some of those things inside of our model here? And speed is becoming paramount, right? What I mean by that is I need real-time access to all of these edge locations, all the cloud resources, all my core compute platforms. I need to find a way to glue all that together and have them complement and orchestrate so that I can control what's going on and actually get very specific things out of that. Right. So on the next slide, if we go to that, Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about some of the challenges that you see from your environment.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think the challenges vary, I think, depending on customer too. So we've got varying different customer base from the large, what we call the AI service providers that are providing that service to other customers, whether it's the large telcos or the service providers specifically, even the large hyperscalers, where they're the ones largely training models that people can use. So they're obviously using huge amounts of data sets. There's a huge expense with doing that. But for customers that want to be able to leverage their services, it also comes down to their data. How do I personalize AI from my organization? How do I protect it and make sure that it's personalized for our organization, but also it doesn't damage our reputational risk, or it adds value to our customers or to our users internally? So that data prep piece is the first piece that we typically look at. You can have, the best trained models, the large language models, or what we're now seeing is more of the small language models, the visual language models that they're using in conjunction with the large language models. But it all comes down to what is the data that I'm going to use, that I'm going to be able to vectorize with those large language models. Have I got the right clean data? Where is that coming from? How do I get that pulled in from the edge, which is anywhere from 60 to 80% of data is being created at the edge. So, and that's everything from your structured data, your unstructured data or semi-structured data. How do we get the value out of that data in a way that's a usable data set with these AI models? So the first thing that we're looking at, that we've built platforms for with our partners, is around how do we get the data from the edge, either real time, right there at the edge, or ingest it in and be able to do more efficient ways of what we call ETL, that extract, transform, load. How do we take those traditional data management functions and even use AI to help with that? So we can get the data and the quality data into what we call our AI Factory framework now, so that you can start to leverage not just a single model, but how can we build applications that are going to use AI that have multiple different models, depending on what we wanted to do. So, now we see, you talk about the trough of despair or the illusionment at the top. We look at agentic AI now, that's the next wave. We had AI or predictive AI, we moved to generative AI, and now we've got agentic AI, and who knows what's going to come next. What Dell is looking at is how do we help customers with simplifying the path to being able to develop those AI use cases, as opposed to figuring out all the different tools they have to pull together to be able to manage getting this data in, to manipulate that data or prepare that data, how to evaluate different models to which one is the right one for them and their use case. And then more importantly, how do we then publish those apps into production for AI inferencing? But then there's also that feedback loop. So when we're deploying those applications, how do we have a method to deploy them securely, deploy them quickly and at scale, when we might have thousands of either users, if it's AI-powered PCs that we're looking at now that we can publish these apps out onto, or whether it's edge locations. We look at retail, manufacturing, healthcare, like edge is a huge part of how they want to actually enable AI applications. So how do we get those applications to the edge, but also be able to bring that data back in? So the challenge today is when we're bringing in the raw data, we're using that data with AI. Now AI is creating net new data from that. So how do we bring that data back in, and we can start to make sure we can capture that data? We continue to do continuous learning on that data. We can update those models, and then we can keep updating those models in those edge applications. So the level of operational burden on organizations trying to roll out to thousands of edge locations is where we've got to with our native edge platform, to simplify that for users, where you don't need truck rolls or having experienced people on site to be able to deploy these applications. But then the core to all of that piece is how do we make sure we've got that consistent transport layer between where the data is coming in raw from the edge, or how we're taking the data back in from the edge and connecting it to our Dell AI Factory. And that's key to our partnership with Vcinity.
Interesting. It sounds like a very simple problem to solve. So we'll see what we got going on here. No, and it's interesting. You brought up a good point, which was the usable data, right? A lot of times when people are getting into AI, it's, oh, just give it more data. Well, you got to have it good data, right? And having that edge curation, some of the things you talked about to make that data, very usable in nature as opposed to just throwaway that could taint your model, I think is extremely important. Yeah, good point. Next slide, please, Lisa. So edge, right? That's really what is complicating a lot of this piece here, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of data being created at the edge, right? Smart factories, smart cities, the tactical edge for the government space. There's a lot of different things out here, but most of that data is being created at the edge, and that just brings a whole plethora of problems, right? And oh, by the way, as you mentioned, you got to get back to the core, right? 83% of the data is being stored on-prem. So how do I link that together, right? How do I make sure that, one, I'm not creating data silos, and if I do have pockets of data, that there's collaboration, there's the ability to share and pick and choose what makes the most sense to move to where you need it, right? To create what you see here as distributed system operations, right? The idea is that I'm not doing AI just at the edge. I'm not doing AI just at the core or potentially in the cloud, right? I'm pulling all this together, and it's almost a nested or distributed approach to solving this problem for my enterprise, right? And then the last one here on the right-hand side is, how do I make it so that it's secure, right? How do I put zero trust in here? How do I create some sort of orchestration or automation, right? Because I might not have, IT support at all these, thousands of edge locations. So how do I find a way to kind of make this all go together so I can have a simplified, automated way of seeing all the information, right? And oh, by the way, what happens if I have limited connectivity? Well, how long does it take to get something over a slow link, maybe a satellite link or something like that, right? So the edge kind of complements or complicates this problem. If there was a nice way to say, hey, I have this really cool core that I can orchestrate and automate and get really, really good performance, and also have it linked to some edge that maybe could be self-provisioned or put some automation in there, that would be a very powerful statement. That, I think, is what you guys are bringing to the equation. So, Rob, back to you. Let's talk about what you got.
The next slide, Lisa. So, we've probably a year ago now, even more so, we've announced the Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA, which is largely based around a framework. Dell's obviously renowned for, being number one market leader in infrastructure and devices, and our engineering of, everything from AI PCs to data center infrastructure all the way to the edge. But it's not all that we're doing. And how do we actually enable customers to deploy these applications or do the work they're trying to do, which is consuming our infrastructure? So a lot of it was, how do we focus on what we're doing in our expertise around data scientists and data engineering and AI infrastructure engineering, and apply that to how we can help customers. And so that was looking at the end-to-end workflow of how customers are actually approaching delivering AI applications. And it starts out with, what are the use cases? What are they ultimately trying to deliver as an outcome? Whether that's around, a code assistant to support how quickly they can get code generated to be able to deliver more applications and capabilities to their customers or internally, or the likes of digital assistants to improve productivity, or the likes of digital twins to automate factories and try and optimize how they're running factories. Then once they've identified those use cases, which we help them with, how do they prioritize those? Which one of them is going to have the biggest business return? A lot of the challenge I think we find with a lot of customers is, which ones should we actually prioritize? At Dell ourselves, we had hundreds of AI use cases, and we had to figure out a way to look at which one should we work on first, because we can't work on all of them. So we developed a framework of how we can help customers do that based on business benefit and the ROI that use case is going to return, and the level of complexity associated with delivering it, as well as the data readiness. Like, do you have the data for that use case? So that's where the data piece comes in, and where we can help everything from, where is the data coming from? Is it coming from the edge? Is it coming from the core? Is it coming from the cloud? What format is that in? How do we help prepare that data before we start developing the application and looking at all the AI/ML frameworks we're going to use to actually develop that capability? Then it's around the expertise. Do you have the expertise in-house to develop that application, all the way from DevOps and developers building an application, through to the AI/ML engineers and the data scientists, all the way down to AI infrastructure engineers. And that's where we leverage some of our partners, as well as Dell's services and expertise, to help customers with, how do we help you go and deliver this outcome? Not just what is the solution you could deploy, how do we actually help you from start and prioritizing those use cases all the way through to achieving the outcomes. Then once we need to be, what the business use case is, and we've got the data, we can start to then look at what is the right ecosystem we need to build to be able to run this use case. So that's where we have our large open ecosystem of partners, from everything from AI/ML tooling to data management tooling, all the way down to infrastructure automation tooling, all the way down to things we're building into our infrastructure. And what we're doing is working with those partners to ensure that those platforms are validated and certified to run on what we call our Dell AI infrastructure, which is largely based around everything you need from an infrastructure point of view to be able to deliver performance for those applications. Whether it's the GPU servers that we have, the management nodes to manage the systems that are going to be consuming them, the networking, the different types of rack, from air cooling to liquid cooling based on your data center availability. Do you have the right amount of power? We have the co-location partners that we can work with, that we can deploy the Dell AI Factory into, and then all the way down to the storage. Like, we need the storage to be able to feed the data to the compute required to run these models. So building all of our data lakehouse infrastructure and our Dell AI Factory infrastructure that can support the different multi-tenant workloads that customers are potentially going to want to run on top of it. So that's kind of a summary of our Dell AI Factory ecosystem. When we look at the Dell AI Factory and how we can deploy that for customers, it also then looks at where is everything coming from. So what we're starting to look at now is we've got developers that need AI-powered PCs. They're not going to walk into the data center and plug into the back of a Dell AI Factory and start doing development there. They need, a high level of compute where we can bring AI to the data. So if we've got developers, they may want to work on an AI-powered PC, or you might have an end user that's using AI as part of their day-to-day roles. So how do we make sure that we've got everything from the AI-powered PC that can connect to the Dell AI Factory, that can also then publish apps to the edge, and full lifecycle management around how do we do that? So that's the framework around what we're doing, and now it's focusing on how do we go and help enterprises execute with some of those prioritized use cases.
Very, very cool.
So when we look at the Dell AI Factory and how we're integrating this into the large ecosystem of edge, we needed a platform that could make sure that customers can only build AI applications, but how do we publish them? AI development is only as good as we're getting the ROI and the benefit from it out there in the wild when we publish these applications. And most of the time, those applications are going to be the edge. That might be the near edge, that might be the far edge. Your end users are an edge endpoint. But for a lot of our customers, it might be their factories, it might be healthcare, it might be branch. I might want to publish a digital assistant into my branch that can help my consumers when they come in. It might be for a retail store that wants to be able to help customers when they come in, or we might want to do fraud and scam detection in a store. We have to run our application there. So how do we make sure that we've both got the compute power at the edge, but as well as an easy way to deploy those applications and be able to leverage the GPU power that's right there at the edge, but also deploy the apps that need to run there and connect them back into the edge. So with that, I'll hand over to Pat, who can give a bit more of an update on what we're doing around our native edge platform.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, very much. So in general, I wanted to give you a high-level overview of the native edge platform and basically how we integrate AI solutions into our catalog and be able to automate them and deploy them to solve real AI use cases and outcomes out on the edge. But in general, high level, for those of you that aren't familiar with native edge, it's an edge operations software platform designed to centralize the deployment and management of edge infrastructure and applications across geo-distributed locations. So really, it aims to accelerate AI innovation at the edge while simplifying operations and maintaining robust security, as we alluded to earlier. I did want to just touch on a couple key features of this platform as it relates to AI, and one of which is centralized management. So native edge centralizes the management of all devices and applications, providing a streamlined approach to managing edge infrastructure and applications from a single point of control. So we can deploy, at scale, one to many in many remote locations. We offer zero-touch deployment, right? So the platform supports zero-touch, reducing the complexity and the time required to deploy new applications and solutions across a lot of these distributed environments. And we do all this through multi-cloud orchestration. So we can offer multi-cloud connectivity, allowing for flexible and seamless integration in various cloud environments. And then our AI capabilities, the platform is optimized for AI at the edge. So it's helping enterprise harness AI to drive efficiencies, reduce costs, and maintain a competitive edge. And then I would say in general, the zero trust security is another key tenet or feature of this platform. Security is a core aspect of Native Edge. We have a zero trust security framework. We harden the device at the factory using a voucher and a digital locker to harden the device and send it directly out to the site to make it easy to deploy and obviously remotely manage. And then our open design from Native Edge is built on an open design that supports a broad ecosystem of partners, allowing for the consolidation of existing and new Edge AI use cases. And then lastly, I do want to focus on Blueprint. I think this is a key tenet of Dell Native Edge. It's kind of our secret sauce. The platform uses Blueprint-driven automation for provisioning and orchestrating and facilitating this rapid deployment, as I mentioned, and configuring everything out at the edge. So, we've done a lot of blueprinting work with a lot of AI applications, and more specifically with Vcinity, our good partner here, to help with the deployment of their solution, already been completed. So overall, the Dell Native Edge empowers enterprises to securely scale their edge environments. We can streamline management, accelerate innovation, and automate and secure the platform. So those are the key tenets in the overview, Rob. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah. So don't forget the next slide, Lisa. So when we look at kind of the overall ecosystem, it's a multi-cloud world. And when we say multi-cloud, it's not just all of the different hyperscalers, but also it could be colos, it could be your on-prem is your own private cloud, and edge could be your mini cloud. So we look at them all together. How do we create an ecosystem for customers where they may want to leverage the cloud? They may want to reach out to the cloud to leverage some of the large language models rather than deploying them on-prem to get responses and then bring that response back into their on-prem Dell AI Factory, where they can then use that in conjunction with their own private data that they don't want to publish externally to get the answers they're looking for, or to be able to train and augment their models and then be able to push those back out to the edge to update those applications. And all of this needs network connectivity. And that often can be the challenge. You might have limited bandwidth. You might need those applications to run autonomously out there at the edge. And then at certain points, they're going to connect back in. So we have the likes of our data collector that we've just developed that's announced for the edge, where we can collect data even from the likes of sensor data with our OT partners. So if you want to be able to use that data, bring it in and automatically transform it to use it with the models that you've got deployed there at the edge, deployed on Native Edge, you can now run those applications and those models locally at the edge and use the compute power there rather than the expensive power in the cloud or even back on-prem with expensive infrastructure. And just bring back in the data that you need, or even just to connect to it remotely via Vcinity. So having this ecosystem where we can connect all these edge locations back into the core location and have extensibility into the cloud means that customers truly have the choice now. They can enable these applications that are not limited to where they can run them. They can now run them anywhere.
Good point. You and Pat made a really good set of points of what the challenges are, but also how you guys are solving those, right? I mean, it's that whole automation, self-provisioning. You mentioned earlier that you might not have the expertise to do all this kind of stuff. So creating a tool set and creating the architecture and the infrastructure to support that kind of process is pretty important. I like this slide. It's my favorite slides because it shows the whole ecosystem of what you have to do to make this whole thing go right across the enterprise, and there's so much involved. Our job here from Vcinity is just we glue it together, right? One of our AI experts, I'll tell the story. One of our AI experts always says, "Hey, if I could take instead of flying you from the U.S. to Australia in 17 hours, if I could fly you in a minute, what's the value of that, right?" And he always says, "Well, I can't do that for you, but I could do it for your data." Right. And that's really what this is about, at least from our perspective. And the complement between the two of us really creates a very powerful tool here. Interesting. So next slide, please. So the whole thing is, okay, we've talked about the challenges. We showed you some really nice features that the AI Factory, that the Native Edge are pulling together. But what does that really mean? The whole idea is what's the value behind this? What am I doing for my business? What am I doing for my mission? Right? There's a lot of different things. We're just going to highlight a couple here. One is, hey, if I can train the models faster, there's value, right? Instead of taking months because I got to wait forever to get the data there, or because my horsepower isn't up to speed, putting that AI Factory in there, putting the Vcinity pieces to glue all that together to get that time frame down That's faster development cycles. It's faster training of those models, right? The other one is, okay, so now that I've trained the model, how do I augment it? We look at RAG, we look at fine tuning, things like that, right? How do I get rid of those hallucinations? And it's really just running it and having that feedback mechanism so that I can make sure that, it's doing what I want it to do, what my business requires, what my mission requires. And the whole idea behind that is to reduce the risk. As I said before, if I'm in the Army there and I want to look at looking for tanks and I find a bunch of horses or something like that, that's a problem, right? So, how do we fix that problem, get rid of those hallucinations? And the last one here is, how do I increase my ROI, right? I want to be able to, really leverage my hardware. I don't want it sitting there, as Lisa mentioned earlier, right? I want to be able to feed that beast, right? I want to make sure that, it's running all the time, that my edges are complementing what's going on, right? It's that efficiency across the entire enterprise. How do I reach through that whole piece and pull it all together to really get an increased ROI for the investment that I'm making here? Some pretty interesting stuff. So Rob or Pat, you want to comment on what you see as well?
I think the increased ROI is an interesting point, and it depends on people's perception of what is ROI. Mm-hmm. So, we look at it more, there's a difference between ROI and TCO. So how are we helping organizations where the business is looking for ROI? Often the IT organizations are looking for lower TCO, and they're kind of counterintuitive sometimes. So when we're trying to do AI development, the time to be able to deploy or test something in the likes of the hyperscalers is much faster. You don't have to wait to ship things to your data center, wait to stand them up, you can get going. But there's potentially a tax that comes with that, because now you're going to be looking at the different token costs and the costs of running that as an OpEx in the cloud. So where's the balance where customers can choose between what is the fastest path to ROI, whether that's revenue generating or cost saving, as in productivity gains, or whether that's truly taking cost out of the bottom line, versus the cost of actually acquiring the solutions that we need to do it. So that's where a lot of what we're looking at now is how do we help customers have the choice of both? Do I want to be able to start in the cloud, but I want to have the options to then be able to bring workloads back on-prem and run them with our data where we can secure it. We can do more of that model augmentation where we can use multiple different models. We can evaluate them, see how effective they are, and then build those into our applications and how we're going to run for inference, rather than the cost of doing that in the cloud when you start looking at scale can start to get expensive. So when you look at the likes of doing model evaluation and you want to be able to run that against your data, there's going to be token cost associated with that. When I want to publish those into AI inference in production, there'll be token costs with that, as well as all the cost of all the infrastructure and the tooling and everything else that we're going to be consuming. So that's where we're seeing this balance of a lower TCO with Dell on-prem, as well as looking at what they can do with the hyperscalers to truly maximize that ROI. So I think when we look at sort of ROI, there's a lot of considerations into what is the business benefit they're going to get and how do you measure that? How do you measure the KPIs associated with the ROI that you're looking at? And how do we look at truly all the cost associated with not just what would it cost to buy a solution, what would it cost to build it, and what does it cost to run it? So we often get sort of compared with what does it cost to acquire, like what would it cost to buy a solution? Whereas there's obviously a cost to deploy and there's a cost to run, whether that's people cost or whether that cost of licensing for tooling, whether that's cost of physical assets that you're amortizing over 3 or 5 years compared to a public cloud OpEx cost and all those toolings that you have to turn on. And then as you start to really use those services and those tools and start to then get the token cost come into this, that's where we're seeing the cost starting to outweigh the benefits. So how do we get to that balance where customers can look at what's the business return versus what the cost and what's the right approach for us? So that's where Dell's being open with, we can help you with on-prem, we can prove the lower TCO running there, but we realize that's not the option for everyone. Sometimes we may want to accelerate experimentation in the cloud, but we've got to enable that ecosystem that connects cloud and edge and the core.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. It's that agility, right? We see a lot of folks that, especially when they're not really sure what to do with AI, right? They'll build one thing, and all of a sudden they realize, well, that wasn't what I expected. But I'm locked into it now. How do I move around? How do I take my workloads or my processes and put in where it makes the most sense for my mission, for my business, something like that. So that's a great point. Next slide, please, Lisa. Just go.
The other thing to point out, Steve, that I think is a key point. The idea of multi-tenancy is becoming a bigger and bigger point. So when you look at organizations that take digital assistants, I may want a sales assistant to make my sales force more productive. I may want a customer service assistant. I may want, to deploy, a coding assistant. Well, there's different tooling now that people are using for all those 3 different digital assistants. So now I've got the compounded effect of different tooling. I'm going to have to use different models for each of them because they may be looking at different data. I may want different responses and how they're going to be used. So how do we help with where customers want a platform that rather than saying, I've got silos of technologies for AI use cases, where can I have some ubiquity across? I can now consume a single platform and carve it up to serve different lines of business, as well as I can use tooling that does more than just one AI use case. So when we start looking at the AI use case prioritization, it's where can we leverage multiple AI use cases using the same platform rather than having to buy individual separate tooling for individual use cases. So that's becoming more and more evident with customers that we're speaking to.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Yeah. So next slide. So let's take a look at what this might look like, right? So we picked just a customer example here. This is pharma. Could be pretty much anything that you have for the enterprise or for your government space there. But the idea is that there's not really one component, right? We're not pulling information into one piece. We're linking environments together, whether the edge, the core, the cloud. An example here is maybe we're doing some research for the next gen drug, right? I want to have my research labs connected together so I can do some data fusion, some sharing, collaboration between those. Again, that federated compute, federated AI, nested AI, whatever you want to call it, right? And then, of course, now that I have something, I got to send it over to manufacturing. So there's, what happens to the manufacturing floor? There's AI, monitoring what's going on, making sure my processors are there and that we're following, exactly what we want to happen here. And that has to link back so that the research can, accommodate any changes associated with that. And then, of course, then you deploy it, right? The inferencing, maybe the remote hospital starting to use this type of drug or this technology, right? And what's happening there? Are they seeing the results that you'd expect? So it's this vicious cycle of linking everything together, right? That pulls in the edge, that pulls in the core, that pulls in the cloud, and again, with you guys providing, the automation across that environment and the orchestration and the simplicity and the expertise, to make this all go. This is a huge example of, one way to put it together. So Rob, anything you want to add to this one here?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a key one with Pat too, but when we look at sort of customers with a lot of locations that could be across the globe, we've got different legislations to worry about, different compliance rules in different countries. They may want to deploy apps that are slightly different in one country, same function, but configured slightly different for that region to another region. Having a central way that we can manage, rather than it be just one single deployment, it goes out to all. How do I manage multiple different builds or images that are going to go out, but in a centralized way? Otherwise, it becomes really difficult to manage. I don't know, Pat, if you would add anything to that, but
yeah, no, that's exactly right, Rob. And the beauty of the platform for Native Edge specifically is you can keep all those environments up to the same standard, right? So the same OS version, the same firmware, and then you could have it distributed if you have different versions in different locations. We can work through that as well, but just a lot easier to manage and support in a remote setting like that with the Native Edge platform.
Good points, guys. So next slide here, I think is the last one. Right? What does this all mean? Why Vcinity? Why Dell? Right? What are we doing? That's the now piece of how to make this go across my enterprise. Right? I'll give a little bit here. One, putting technology in that maximizes the existing infrastructure you have. Right? We don't want to forklift everything. We want to complement and augment what you have and grow it. Right? That's one of the biggest pieces that we see out there. And you want to do it across the entire enterprise. Right? I want to be able to reach all those remote locations. Whether it's satellite, whether it's small links, whether it's small little footprints of compute platforms. But the idea is, I usually have a global enterprise that I want to be able to reach all of it, not just ignore parts of it, right? Time becomes extremely important, right? And the whole idea behind this whole conversation is, what is the modern approach? How do I take AI from where it is to where I need it to be for my particular business, my domain, my government organization here? And then the last piece, that I see here is what you mentioned before, right? It's got to be scalable. I have to have agility and flexibility in there so that I can grow and manipulate what goes where to take the most advantage of the tool sets that I have. So Rob and Pat, comments on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the data is kind of the biggest challenge right now.
Mm-hmm.
Where are people storing their data and where am I having to publish my data to? So there's a lot of valuable tools out there, some running in the cloud, some that are available to run on-prem. Some we've had to publish data or ingress our data into the likes of the cloud providers because we want to use the tools there. Now do I have to pull all that data back if now I want to run this locally on-prem? So having this partnership with Vcinity means you don't always have to move your data. What if I can just query the data in place and where it lives? Can bring the results only back from those queries rather than shipping all the data sets back and egress costs that I may have with doing that. how can I make sure that I can have connectivity to wherever my data is, and wherever I choose to run queries or run AI models against that data locally, wherever it is. The only way that we can stay connected with those models running there or the data running there is with the likes of a transport layer like Vcinity, particularly when we look at WAN connectivity. So, direct links is slightly different, but where we don't always have the benefit. We've got customers that have got thousands of retail stores. How do I publish out my apps that I want a particular AI model for this store that's in a different location to another one, and we have to tailor our AI and personalize it for that store versus a store that's in a completely different country or a totally different region? Then I still may want to add personalization there. How do I stay connected with those, update them without the burden of I've got to go and manage all of those individually? I can centralize that and I can connect to them. So that WAN connectivity as well as direct links is important, and the ability to connect into the public clouds as well as back on-prem is becoming more and more apparent. It's not a case anymore of I'll have to choose whether I put it here or put it here. It could be everywhere. So how do I connect that in a federated way?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, it's interesting. One of our customers came to us with a similar problem. They're like, look, I created this model, but it takes me forever to deploy it. And once it's deployed, it's old, right? So, how do I solve that problem? I think between the two of us, we've come up with a good approach to that. So, Lisa, I'm going to actually hand it back over to you. It looks like we might have some questions here.
You do. Thank you so much. You made that so seamless for me. I appreciate it. Thank you guys. For everyone on the line, we are going to transition over into our Q&A session. So I see someone started already. Thank you very much. We have a few, but feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A tab and we'll float those over. I'll be pitching those out to Steve, Rob, and Pat. So let me just pull those up and we'll dive right in. First one for you guys. This is nice because it circles back to our, the hype cycle slide in the beginning. Tell me a little bit about, from your perspectives and who you've seen so far, what verticals are the furthest ahead in terms of true enterprise adoption? You could also think about they are furthest along on the slope of enlightenment, or have paid enough therapy bills to get past the trough of disillusion.
Go ahead, Rob. What do you got?
That one? Okay. It's a very good question. It's potentially a broad one because we look at the difference between the types of AI. So when you look at the likes of financial services, they've been doing AI for decades, and what we kind of call predictive AI, traditional machine learning, and creating these algorithms to do something very specific and predictive. Almost what I'd say, rather than artificial intelligence, it's intelligent automation. So, and then there's Gen AI. So, and I think the adoption of Gen AI has been a lot slower in highly regulated organizations, not because they don't have the skills to do it, because either they haven't truly realized the ROI of which use cases they want to do, or the risks associated with doing it. If we're going to enable Gen AI to create content, that's going to have reputational risk, potential copyright or litigation risk, so, and privacy risk of data leakage. So, I think financial services have been very far ahead in terms of developing it internally that then they can use as services they provide to their customers, as opposed to providing Gen AI directly to their customers to interface with their organization. But I think there's been more of a trend towards the types of AI use cases being used now. So when we look at the likes of digital assistants seem to be coming out right on top. Whether that's a digital assistant to support things like customer service that we're seeing a lot in the likes of the telcos and the financial services, as well as the likes of healthcare. And not necessarily, some of the digital humans are now creating that customer experience. I think it's more about the accuracy of how well that can interact from a conversational AI point of view with their customers, and how can they leverage that information to better serve their customers as opposed to giving it directly to their customers. So I'd say from an internal adopting AI, I'd say a lot of the healthcare and financial services are pretty well advanced in terms of what they're doing. I think in terms of public facing, it's a lot more of the lower compliance or regulated organizations, whether it's the likes of retail or the likes of manufacturing, that can use it to optimize what they're doing in their factories, for example, or creating a customer experience that's better than what they had before. So I think it just depends on whether it's internal development use cases or externally facing use cases.
Yeah, good point. We see some of the same things, and I'll answer it a little bit differently, which is not necessarily the vertical, but a more horizontal use case where we're starting to see AI really go forward is on cybersecurity. right? It's having that piece because it affects everybody, and that is a huge business driver. Get the risks away, as well as even in the Fed space, right? It's how do I put AI into solving some of my cybersecurity risks for finding outliers, all those types of things. So it's not a given vertical, but that is something that we're seeing coming up through the pipe.
I would say it's also a maturity as well. Like customers that have been doing predictive AI for a long time are set up to do generative AI a lot better because they're allowing them to enable Gen AI on existing predictive models they already have, as opposed to just trying to introduce Gen AI without any pre-existing experience of how they've been developing using AI models from a predictive point of view. Those that have been doing it for a long time are faster to take new use cases to market with Gen AI than those that haven't.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. As you guys were talking here, I was thinking a lot of these also correlate down to what industries are really hyper dependent on large data sets, whether that's MRI scans or geospatial imaging or customer data for financial services. So they're also probably at a level of readiness where they're able to start utilizing that data in a valuable way. So
yeah, Rob, you touched on it, but from an edge perspective, right? The three verticals that really we're seeing a lot of is really vertical centric with manufacturing, with retail, and with smart cities in particular. Like manufacturing, we're solving for predictive maintenance, quality assurance, safety. You look at retail and things like theft deterrence, inventory management, cold chain management, things of that nature with computer vision. And digital cities would be things like first responder and safety awareness, and those sort of things. And then we're seeing use cases across the board. You look at transportation and things like trains, specifically around collision avoidance and being able to predict things that are in the track way ahead of the train, whether it's people or animals or just trees that have fallen over. Those are just specific use cases that we're seeing a lot of on the edge side.
Yeah, which is super helpful. Trying to be mindful of time. I'm going to pitch out one kind of very general question for you guys. Might be figuring out use cases we were just talking, but as we're thinking about, a lot of us are still in the where do I apply AI? Am I experimenting with a model? Is it deployed? Perhaps I've been doing this for years in the FinServ space, but what's important as you're thinking about you're driving your AI strategy, and that's kind of going to evolve into an enterprise space? Is it security? Is it infrastructure? Is it finding the right use case? I think someone mentioned having the right kind of set of tooling to utilize across. Kind of what's the takeaway?
I would say the primary is the business stakeholders understanding what the ROI is going to be for a use case. I think we've gone beyond the experimentation phase. People need platforms to do experimentation, but they're now prioritized to which one is going to provide a business return. Is this going to save us money? Is this going to make us money? Or is this going to avoid risk? Everything else should flow down after that. Just deploying infrastructure and testing some models may be great for data scientists and AI/ML engineers and showing what cool things are possible, but if the business isn't going to use them, it's wasted investment. So I'd say the biggest top priority, I think, is AI use case prioritization and having true KPIs that can measure the value that's delivered for the business.
Yeah, that's a huge point. It's the why question. Just because we can doesn't mean we should, right? So I think between the two of us, we provide that flexibility to do what makes the most sense for business. So interesting question.
Awesome. Well, I realize this has gone almost perfectly, and we have less than 60 seconds left. We're going to try to be respectful of folks' times, including you guys. So Pat, Rob, Steve, thank you guys so much for joining us. You are fantastic. We appreciate your advice and insights on kind of how to tame this enterprise beast, or at least start approaching how to unlock enterprise-wide possibilities in a smart way. And that's maybe figuring out what are those right KPIs, what's the right prioritization, how are you thinking about your data sets, what are you doing at the edge, how are you gluing it together? So thank you guys so much for spending the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And for everyone on the line as well, we know it's still digital. It may be cold in winter, but there's many places you could be. So thanks for choosing to spend your morning or afternoon with us. We're very excited for that. As a quick wrap as well, if we didn't get to your question, you have extras, please feel free to reach out to your Vcinity or Dell sales reps. You'll also be receiving an email from me with a recording, so you can reach out there too. But thank you. Watch out again for that recording of the session, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.